Our president will start a war with Iran because he has absolutely no ability to negotiate. He's weak and he's ineffective.
Did you know Iran and the United States were once so close that President Jimmy Carter stood in Tehran in 1977, raised his glass, and toasted the Shah of Iran as the leader of an island of stability? The two countries were allies, business partners, and friends. America even sold Iran its most advanced weapons. Iran sat at the center of U.S. strategy in the Middle East. But as we speak, the supreme leader is dead. U.S. military bases across 7 countries are on fire, and the Middle East has been turned completely upside down.
The United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
To understand how these two got to this point, we need to go back to 1953, when the United States made a stupid decision that Iran never forgave. The story of how the United States and Iran became bitter enemies actually starts with British greed and a massive ocean of oil. Back in the mid-20th century, the British government controlled almost all of Iran's petroleum through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. They were paying the locals a pathetic 16% of the profits while taking 84% to fund their own Royal Navy. Iranian workers lived in absolute slums in Abadan, while British executives relaxed in luxury-gated compounds. This obvious robbery fueled the rise of Mohammad Mossadegh into power, a Swiss-educated lawyer who became prime minister in 1951. He decided the Iranian people should own their natural wealth and completely nationalize the oil industry. His pitch was simple: Iranian oil should benefit Iranian people, period. When the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company refused to open its accounting books or offer a fairer share, the Iranian parliament voted unanimously to nationalize the industry on May 1, 1951. The British lost their minds, froze Iranian bank accounts, and set up a global naval blockade. What happened next is where the United States enters the story and immediately does something it would spend the next 70 years apologizing for, or in most cases, not apologizing for at all. When Eisenhower took office in 1953, the British came to him with a pitch. They said Mossadegh was going soft on communism and the Soviets were ready to move in. Whether Eisenhower truly believed that or just needed a reason, we will never know. What we do know is that he authorized Operation Ajax, the CIA's first ever overthrow of a democratically elected government. The man running the operation on the ground was Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt. His strategy was textbook political warfare. He paid Tehran mobsters to stage pro-Shah riots in the streets. He bribed newspaper editors to print stories calling Mossadegh a mentally unstable communist. He paid influential clerics to denounce the prime minister from their pulpits. When the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, signed a decree dismissing Mossadegh on 1953, the prime minister's people caught the couriers carrying the paperwork and arrested them. The Shah panicked and fled to Rome. The operation looked completely dead, but Roosevelt stayed in Tehran, kept the pressure on, and by August 19th, his paid mobs had overwhelmed Mossadegh's supporters. General Fazlollah Zahedi was installed as the new prime minister. Mossadegh was arrested, convicted of treason, and spent the rest of his life under house arrest. American companies walked away with a 40% stake in Iranian oil. 3 generations of Iranians never forgot what happened. After installing the Shah as the new ruler, the United States essentially adopted him as its favorite regional project. Under the Nixon Doctrine, which basically told allies to handle their own security while America supplied the tools, the Shah became the world's biggest single buyer of American military hardware. He bought everything: Grumman F-14 Tomcats, the most advanced air superiority fighters of the era. Ships, artillery, helicopters, you name it. He even purchased aerial refueling squadrons he did not actually need, simply because it suited American defense industry interests. The oil money that should have been funding schools and hospitals was being converted into weapons contracts. There was also a humiliation baked into this arrangement that never gets talked about enough. When the United States delivered the F-14s and their Phoenix missiles, the components were deliberately shipped in separated parts to ensure that Iranian Air Force crews could never operate the systems independently. They needed American contractors on site just to keep the planes flying. Meanwhile, to keep the Shah in power against his own population, the CIA and Israel's Mossad helped establish SAVAK, the Internal Security and Intelligence Organization, in 1957. By the 1970s, it had over 5,300 full-time agents, plus an unknown army of informers embedded across universities, markets, and workplaces. Amnesty International declared in 1974 that no country in the world had a worse human rights record than Iran. The U.S. government read those reports and kept writing checks to the Shah anyway. The opposition had no legal outlet, no political voice, and nowhere to go except underground into the clerical networks that were about to change history. The 1979 Islamic Revolution caught the American government completely off guard. Officials in Washington were totally blind to the explosive anger boiling under the surface. President Jimmy Carter even gave a famous toast praising Iran as an island of stability right before the entire country erupted. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile and replaced the pro-Western monarchy with a radical theocracy that labeled the United States as the Great Satan. The ultimate breaking point hit on November 4, 1979, when angry Iranian students stormed the American embassy in Tehran and took 52 diplomats hostage. The students were terrified the CIA was planning another secret coup because the fleeing Shah was receiving cancer treatment in America. In response to this massive crisis, the American military launched Operation Eagle Claw in April 1980. The rescue mission was a total disaster from the start. 8 service members died in the massive explosion. The hostages were finally released after 444 days, but the diplomatic damage was absolutely permanent. When Iraq invaded Iran on September 2, 1980, the United States initially said it was staying neutral. That neutrality lasted about as long as their assessment of the Shah's stability. By 1982, the Reagan administration had decided that an Iranian victory was the worst outcome, so it began tilting toward Baghdad. It provided Iraq with billions in economic aid, dual-use technology, and high-resolution satellite intelligence that Saddam Hussein's forces used for combat planning. American diplomat Donald Rumsfeld flew to Baghdad and met personally with Saddam, shaking his hand on camera and making clear that Washington was on his side. This continued even after U.S. intelligence confirmed that Iraq was deploying chemical weapons against Iranian troops in human wave assaults. The Regal Report, published by the U.S. Senate Banking Committee in 1994, documented that the Department of Commerce had licensed shipments of anthrax bacteria and botulinum toxin to Iraq between 1985 and 1989. These were live, unweakened biological agents exported under cover of medical research. Chemical precursors for mustard gas and nerve agents were shipped alongside them. When the Halabja massacre happened and international pressure began building against Iraq, U.S. officials quietly worked to shift some of the blame onto Iran. And then the Iran-Contra scandal revealed that while all of this was happening, the Reagan administration was also secretly selling Tau anti-tank missiles and Hawk anti-aircraft missiles to Iran in exchange for help releasing American hostages held in Lebanon. The United States was simultaneously arming both sides of a war that killed over 1 million people. Iran came out of it economically devastated, but with a deep generational hatred for what it called Western hypocrisy and a self-sufficient war culture that would define its strategy for the next 4 decades. By the mid-2000s, everything changed when Iran started building secret underground nuclear facilities at Natanz and Fordow. The United States was convinced Tehran was racing for a bomb. Iran swore it was just peaceful energy. George W. Bush called Iran part of the axis of evil in 2002.
Iran is today the world's leading state sponsor of terror.
U.S. intelligence said Iran had a full weapons program until 2003, then paused it. Washington did not believe the pause was permanent. By 2010, Iran had enough low-enriched uranium for potentially 2 bombs if they pushed further. Obama tried the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action nuclear deal.
That arrangement is permanent. And the IAEA has also reached an agreement with Iran to get access that it needs to complete its investigation into the possible military dimensions of Iran's past nuclear research.
Iran capped centrifuges, limited enrichment to 3.67%, and opened facilities to International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors. Iran's breakout time, the months needed for bomb-grade uranium, stretched over a year. The deal worked until Trump ripped it up in 2018, calling it the worst agreement ever.
At the heart of the Iran deal was a giant fiction that a murderous regime desired only a peaceful nuclear energy program.
Maximum pressure sanctions crushed Iran's economy. Tehran hit back by enriching to 60% purity, weapons-grade territory. Breakout time collapsed to weeks. The supreme leader said America could not be trusted for a single drop of urine. The nuclear fight became the perfect mirror of their entire relationship. Iran saw sovereign rights. America saw an existential threat. Every failed negotiation circled back to 1953's broken trust. Every sanction and strike got justified as stopping a nuclear Iran. When 2025 and 2026 bombs finally hit Fordow, Natanz, and Parchin, nobody blinked. 7 decades of enmity had made the nuclear standoff inevitable. The conflict eventually evolved into the world's first major cyber war over the Iranian nuclear program. Everything changed in 2010 with the discovery of Stuxnet, a ridiculously advanced computer worm built by American and Israeli intelligence under Operation Olympic Games. This was the very first time a digital weapon crossed over into the physical world to cause actual explosions. The virus specifically targeted Siemens programmable logic controllers inside the heavily guarded Natanz enrichment facility. Spies had to use infected USB sticks to breach the air-gapped computers, exploiting 4 different Windows zero-day vulnerabilities. Stuxnet was a masterpiece of digital deception. It secretly ordered the nuclear centrifuges to spin at highly destructive speeds while sending perfectly normal sensor data back to the Iranian control room screens. The scientists sitting at the desks literally watched their screens show green lights while almost 1,000 centrifuges tore themselves apart in the next room. This aggressive attack successfully destroyed a massive chunk of Iran's nuclear program. But the strike totally backfired in the long run and triggered even more hatred. It forced the Iranian regime to rapidly accelerate their own hacking capabilities and heavily fortify their remaining facilities. This invisible shadow war completely destroyed any remaining diplomatic trust, eventually leading Iran to push their uranium enrichment to 60% by early 2025 and shutting down all international inspections. On January 3, 2020, an MQ-9 Reaper drone fired on a convoy near Baghdad International Airport and killed Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the IRGC Quds Force. It was the first time the United States had explicitly targeted and killed a high-ranking state military official from a country it was not formally at war with on the soil of a third country. The Trump administration called it self-defense against an imminent threat. Iran called it an act of war and promised shattering revenge. 70 years of hatred reached its ultimate climax. On June 21, 2025, 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers and over 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles hit 3 of Iran's most critical nuclear sites simultaneously. Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan all took direct strikes in a window that lasted less than 30 minutes. Trump stood at the White House podium the next morning and said the operation had devastated the Iranian nuclear program.
Massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan.
By this point, the two sides had spent 70 years accumulating grievances so deep that even a gas leak sounded like a cover story. That level of distrust does not develop overnight. It gets built brick by brick, coup by coup, sanction by sanction, assassination by assassination, until the two countries reach a place where diplomacy and military action are happening at the exact same time and nobody is surprised. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched simultaneous strikes across Tehran, Isfahan, Karaj, and Kermanshah in the largest coordinated military operation in Israeli history. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the man who had spent decades calling America the Great Satan, was killed in the strikes. Iran immediately launched ballistic missiles at Israel and hit U.S. military bases across 7 countries simultaneously, from Bahrain to Kuwait to Jordan. Every mechanism that could have stopped the two sides from reaching this moment had been destroyed years earlier. The 1953 coup destroyed trust. Savak destroyed goodwill. The hostage crisis destroyed diplomacy. The Iran-Iraq war destroyed any remaining pretense of good faith. Soleimani's assassination destroyed the last unspoken rules. And February 28, 2026 was simply what happens when two countries spend 70 years choosing every path except the one that leads away from each other.